Hey, this is Writers Row, where we talk about Twitter's writing community. We talk about writing in general, including the business side and the creative side. I am your host, as always, DC Wright-Hammer, science fiction writer for the Between Two Minds series. And as always, I am joined by
David Gane, who is I don't know why I went suddenly third person there. I'm the co-writer of the Shepherd and Wolf mystery series, young adult mystery, murder mysteries, awesome fun stuff.
Yep, and we have a very special guest for this episode.
Hi, I'm Poulomi. A lot of people know me already. I'm a science fiction and lit fic, contemporary fiction writer. I write a mix of different things. And right now I am traveling for a book tour in India. So hello from India.
Really excited to have you, and we've been talking. David and I have been talking about having more international guests. We had EJ Dawson on the last episode, who is from Australia, and definitely excited. I know you're living in Canada, but you're traveling to India, but we just want to broaden our horizons. And so, how are we doing? David, how are you doing today?
I'm awake and I've got coffee, so everything's great.
I'm myself, same thing. I've got some coffee instead of the water or a libation of any kind. I decided to make crepes this morning for the first time. I don't know why I did that. It turned out well, but it was just a lot of work. So here we go.
I don't know why it be so much work.
It's the first time I ever did. So, but yeah, how are you doing, Poulomi?
I'm doing fine. It's evening here. I don't have any coffee, but I do have. Well, it's not too late for coffee anyway. I have a Thought Warrior themed mug, which may or may not have any whiskey in it.
May or may not have.
Yeah.
And that's for your just released book series, right? The first book.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's my merch.
Nice. Did you get that done in India?
I did, yeah.
Okay, I was going to say, you must have had it done there instead of...
It's way cheaper, yeah. It's absolutely, it's like, what, $2?
Oh, really?
For one cup, one mug, yeah.
Nice.
It's crazy.
Very nice. All right. So this episode, we wanted to talk about somewhat of a sensitive topic in the writing community and writers abroad. When David and I started doing Writers Row, we knew we wanted to talk about things that might be controversial, things that we all kind of discuss or think about. And so the topic it's really two topics. It's tropes that you find in writing, and we'll define this in just a second, and then censorship. And I think the two topics are related. I think they're both broader by themselves, but we wanted to tackle them together because I think they come up often. You'll hear in social media, oh, that's a trope, or why are you appealing to that trope? Or you'll say if somebody criticizes somebody else's writing or a topic that they discuss that they need to be, censored, or somebody might bring that up. And so we wanted to open the discussion, and we wanted to bring on Poulomi, who has been vocal in writing community about a lot of topics that are related to this show. So so I guess I'll open it up with a definition of tropes and a definition of censorship, and then I will ask some questions of Poulomi. And so a trope really is a story mechanic. I think there's a lot of negative connotation with tropes, but in a nutshell, it's just a story mechanic that a reader can identify with and help you move your story forward. And some examples are like the chosen one trope. That's actually a mechanic. If you have a story that is following a hero or somebody who is, starting from nothing and becomes the chosen one and saves the day, that's actually defined as a trope. And so that might be considered more of a positive one to some extent. But then you also have, on the other side, potential negative tropes. Damsel in distress, meaning there is a woman or a figure like, a woman who is needing to be rescued, needing to be saved, and often it's by a male counterpart or somebody who is the hero. In some cases, the chosen one has to save the damsel in distress. And so with that in mind, in some cases you might have backlash if people write tropes and they put groups in a negative light. And so things like, if you write, there's like the token minority trope, meaning you put somebody of color or somebody who is a minority in power in your book, and you kind of define them in a stereotypical type of way. They're not really defined or fleshed out in some cases, and they just kind of hold a place where you can kind of say, hey, I put somebody in my book that holds that role, but they might not be significant. They just kind of check a box and you move on. Again, I know these are controversial topics, but we want to dig into them. And so I think I want to start with an open-ended question of Poulomi, kind of based on some of the definitions I've said and the topic in general. What kind of thoughts do you have in today's writing community, in writing in and of itself, of tropes, and then the backlash, and people call it censorship, on those tropes?
I have, like you said, I mean, there are two kinds of tropes, really. There are the good tropes, which are just basically a standard storyline that a lot of people kind of like the chosen one trope, or some of those that, like for example, thrillers. In thrillers, there are some standard tropes. So the spy thrillers, the suave spy that comes in as a womanizer, etc., etc. Those are much more benign, I think, in terms of a trope. But then tropes that, like you said, involve minorities or women, or show them in a derogatory light. I read books like that, but personally, I find that to be offensive. Everybody may not be like that. Depends. I mean, there's a lot of people that we risk offending. I mean, a lot of people that might take offense to a certain stance that, so the best way, I think, to go about it, and a lot of the people in the writing community are going about it, is to get sensitivity readers, like prior to publication. If you're writing about a colored person, if you're writing about a gay person, a lesbian person in your book, then have someone who identifies with that community go through it and read it, and if they feel offended by some of the stuff that you've written, you still have time to change that. And a lot of people have done that with me in the writing community. They have sent me segments of their writing that are based on subcontinental people and Indians and things like that. And I know when I read it, I told them my feelings. This is what I feel about this character, or this, this is not true to what the reality is with South Asians. Yes, there's also the South Asian trope of, all Indians work in the IT industry. Everyone is a call center. Everyone is dying to work in the call center industry. That is absolutely not the case. That's not the reality. And from what is out there on Wikipedia or in American fiction, it's very hard to know unless you've lived in a subcontinental country. You won't really know that nobody wants to work in a call center here. That's not the goal. That's not everyone's life's goal. That is the reality. They got into that. Employment is a big problem. There's a lot of unemployment, a lot of educated people who are not getting appropriate jobs. It's much harder to get employment in South Asia than it is in North America. And a lot of educated, if you're a high school grad or a high school dropout, you end up not securing any jobs at all. I mean, it's that dire, and people are desperate. And of course, when the call centers are set up, and these are very oppressive, jobs and capitalistic, but they sign up for it because they do have to, feed families and things like that. So that's what I, generally feel about tropes. There are good tropes, which are, they're rehashed. They're kind of repetitive sometimes. Sometimes they get boring, but they're not offensive. But then the tropes that kind of, like you said, use a minority character and just, check a box and be like, oh, I have, colored person, but is the colored person your protagonist? Well, or even if they're not the protagonist, how significant is their role in that series or in that novel, and do they really make the plot move forward? Do they actually make significant contribution to the story, or are they just there because it's cool to have, you know, gay people and colored people and etc people, right? So that's, yeah.
One thing I kind of liked about what you were saying, and something I've often thought about, is when a lot of people write any character, and maybe I'm wondering if this is a bit of lazy writing, is that they don't empathize enough with who that character is. So, so it's like, it's just so shallow of a character that they don't even consider that. Where when you're getting into, I don't know, honestly, so I write with a writing partner who's female and she's Greek, so I always have that extra perspective of stuff, right? And I always think about it. It's like, you know, how does I'm just going to keep it very simple. How does a guy react to this situation versus how does a woman react to this situation? And it's always nice to have somebody to bounce those questions off of. And I kind of wonder if, with having a sensitivity reader, if you get that opportunity to just say, okay, like you said, this is not the way the real situation is, and you're just you're adding experience, correct?
Right. Correct. Yeah. But you know what saddens me sometimes is I've written, so even with my first book, with some of the feedback that I've received, and I read an article about this too. I think someone, William Eicher, might have shared it, where it's very sad when sometimes, because in North America or in the Western world there is a way of portraying minority lives, that when the original experience is actually narrated by someone who has lived it, it seems like it's contrived. It seems like it's not believable, right? Because I got that kind of feedback with my first book, from one reader who said that these emotions of somebody falling in love with a coworker just by being a coworker is unrealistic. But you know, it's a true story. My first book was based on a true story. So there are people in the world who would feel that way, especially if you look at the cultural context. In India, people are used to a culture where arranged marriage was the norm. You know, people fell in love with, their partners that were actually chosen by their parents. So it's not unusual for someone to fall in love with a person that they've worked with, even if they've not really formally dated. It's the cultural coloring. I didn't explain that in the book, of course, because, it's like explaining your own joke. But but when the Indians have read it, they don't find it unusual. That's what I'm saying. So when somebody reads the authentic experience of a colored person, they think, well, this is not believable. This is so disproportionate. Yes, maybe it's disproportionate for you, but there are people of all kinds of different cultures. Maybe it's not disproportionate for them. You know what I mean? So this is there. And so if you are trying to write for a very broad audience, it's hard, because a lot of people won't relate to these things, and you have to, and then what do? Do you explain your joke? Because that would just ruin the story, right? But yeah.
And so how do you balance it? When you're appealing to an audience, you need things that they identify with.
Yeah.
If you don't have them identify with something in your story, then that's clearly not your audience.
Right.
How do you balance that with the possibility of appealing to a negative trope, or putting a negative trope in your book, or something that will give you backlash? So how do you balance that?
Yeah, I don't know if I have done that effectively. It's hard, of course. It's hard, and it's difficult, and especially on the censorship topic, for example. Censorship for an Indian audience, and especially like I mentioned before we started recording, India is a really large audience for English fiction. It is the second largest audience in the world, and a lot of North American writers are not catching this market. And one of the main reasons for that is because of the cultural differences, because of the censorship of the Indian audience. An Indian audience is not going to warm up to trashy writing. It's not going to warm up to a lot of slang. It's not going to warm up to a lot of erotic content. I mean, there are some readers for that kind of content, but overly erotic writing might not be accepted. It won't definitely be widely accepted in India. So you have to balance that. Yet, if you aren't doing some of that, romance, some of that, those really touchy-feely moments for the North American audience, it seems bland. A lot of people are not going to pick up that book that doesn't really have those real genuine relationships or things. If it's especially in science fiction, maybe not so much, but in lit fic. So I try to keep it kind of at the cusp. A little bit of that, teasing the romance, but not getting into, trying to not be very trashy. So some of the dialogue that I have in there, again, I have a lot of, usually what I write, I have a lot of diverse cast of people, like from all over the world, not just from India, from Mexico, from Germany, and as David would know and attest to, we meet. Canada is a very diverse country. It has people from all over the world, and having living there and being a Canadian citizen, we know about lots of people, like a lot from different cultures. We get to experience their cultures firsthand, and that's why I like to write about these cultures. They fascinate me. And because all these cultures are melded together, the dialogue is not always necessarily American, because most of these people don't talk like the Americans. They don't act like the Americans. You know that, David, right? Like, a lot of these people have their own, styles and formalities and their ways of interacting, which is different. So, but for a strictly American audience, it might seem like, wait, this is not how Americans talk. But then you have to look at it from the perspective, well, they're not American. So it's tricky. That's why, again, like David was mentioning before we started recording, why did I come to India? That's why I came here, because I think getting the acceptability with this audience, with the type of writing that I am focusing on, is going to be easier for me than tapping into the North American market. I think it will eventually happen. I think there are elements in my writing that could appeal to both audiences, and some of you have read my books and liked them, and some of them have liked them quite a lot, which I'm very happy for that. And I don't want to exclude anyone, one or the other, but because of my heritage and my cultural roots, I want to keep, both audiences happy.
I always think about, because as you were talking about it, there's the line, and this kind of answers also something, or responds to something that DC had said earlier, which is, maybe it's not about trying to get the broadest audience, it's getting the audience that connects to the story. Like, maybe you shouldn't be trying for the widespread, right? And just try and connect to what's the line? I can't think of the line. It's like, the stories, these are the stories for those kind of people,
those
right?
Kind of people, yeah, absolutely. That's, yeah. DC,
I was going to say, it's, you have a message you want to convey with your book. There is something that your audience is looking to get from it. Yeah. That's a Venn diagram.
Venn diagram, yeah. It's overlap portion, yeah.
That overlap portion. I don't know what David is doing over there, but...
And I think that's the thing with me too. Like, I have kind of realized with both the books that I've released, I think the audience for my books are mostly people that are they have a dynamic career, people who are working professionals, they have interest in science, like real hard science, in writing, and people that have hectic lives, not people who are, they're probably not the ones that read hundreds and thousands of books in their lifetime. They probably don't have time to read a lot of books, but they do have their favorites, and they would read them. And I want to become the favorites of these kind of people. Like, for example, the type of people I've worked with, my coworkers. We used to go on business trips together, and I saw people sitting there with me next to me in a flight, reading books like the girl with the dragon tattoo and stuff like that, thriller type of books and things like that, right? So those are the people they're not voracious readers. They don't have that kind of time, but they, latch on to their favorite authors and they read all their books. So I'm trying to target that audience, and that's why I'm trying to get my colleagues to read them too, and I think a few of them have, and get their feedback. And college students, I think they would be a good target. And that's the kind of audience I'm aiming for. But of course, I know I won't be upset if other people read my book, as long as it doesn't upset them and they don't write a lashing negative review, which they might anyway. But what I'm saying is that that's not my core audience. That's not who I'm writing for. If you're if you're a very busy person, you hardly read any books, but you want to read thriller that has real science, real facts, yes, my writing is for you.
So, say I want to write a character that is not middle-aged white Canadian male. Am I allowed to?
Of course, absolutely. Why not? And I think some people are, doing a great job of writing people of, characters that are not very different from them. I write characters who are very different from me too. So of course.
So
yeah.
But so why? What makes them able to write those? Like, how do you not slip into stereotypes? Would you say?
I think it's a question of how perceptive a person is. And I think a lot of people, I've read works from even in our community, some of the people that even you guys know, I've read their books, they write amazing, they're middle-aged white males. And they write really, really good, complex, and believable women of color characters. And I think it's a question of, I think it's a writer's job, primarily, to be perceptive, to be able to understand the people around them in their lives, So if you are good at doing that, and if you're not good at doing that, you can always become good at doing that. If you start observing, how does this colleague I have who's an Indian, take them out to lunch and see how they behave and react to certain situations, listen to their stories. If you're talkative, it helps, I guess. Or even if you're not talkative, if you're a good listener, I think. And if you want to, there's people in our lives from all kinds of, communities and areas. And even if you don't have that interaction, you can always watch foreign films, foreign movies, and if you're perceptive, you can pick it up, and you can always write a character that's completely different from yourself, and not be colored by your own perception. It's hard, of course, but I think it's totally doable, yeah.
Well, I want to spend the next few minutes talking about the censorship aspect of it, because I think that that's sort of the next leap that some people would take if they get backlash, or even if they get a sensitivity reader who's very sensitive to some of these things and gives them feedback. A writer might throw their hands up and say, okay, can I write about anything these days? I want to kind of real quick open it up with a quote from Ray Bradbury. If people are familiar, he wrote Fahrenheit 451, and it's very much on this topic where in the near future they burn books because it makes people think critically. And one of the reasons why they burn books, that they give this explanation in the book, it's sort of a spoiler if you haven't read it, but the main antagonist says because of feminists, because of minorities, when they read books and they have some of these tropes, they have some of these negative views of people of color and of women, he says that the antagonist says we have to burn the books because people are offended. I think that resonates so true today. And let me just do this quote. You must understand our civilization is so vast that we can't have minorities upset and stirred. This is not from the book, but from Ray Bradbury himself. It says, colored people, that's the quote, not what I'm saying, don't like Little Black Sambo. Burn it. White people don't feel good about Uncle Tom's Cabin. Burn it. Someone's written a book on tobacco and cancer of the lungs. The cigarette people are weeping. Burn the book. And then he says Serenity Montague, who's the main character in the book. But this is from an interview where he's kind of talking about, the different things that, are present in the book. But he actually feels this. He feels censored by these groups who are looking for realistic portrayal. They're looking for their stories to be told, and he feels censored when people bring this up. So what do you think of that, Poulomi?
I think personally, people should be there. Of course, I believe in freedom of speech, right? People should be allowed to say whatever they want to say. But at the same time, I mean, you can say whatever you want. You can think that, black people are scum. You can think that brown people are scum. You can think that. You can say that if you want. But you can't expect to be liked. You can't expect to be well read. You can't expect to be respected in the modern day. And especially now, we talk about colored people being a minority. That is the case in the West. But if you look at the world's population, I mean, white people are a minority. I'm so sorry, white people. But no, I mean, demographically, it's true, right? I mean, more than half of the world's population, majority of the world's population are brown and black and, colored people of all different nationalities. And so they are the majority of the world. You don't have to, I mean, as a writer, you don't have to appeal to, like David said, you don't have to necessarily appeal to a wider audience. If you don't want to appeal to them, that's fine. You can only appeal to the white supremacists if you want. I mean, that's a little extreme, but if, like, you have freedom of speech. You can say whatever you want, and as long as it's not hateful. You can create them as minority characters, put all kinds of tropey kind of ideas over them, of course. But then, as long as people are becoming much more aware of their surroundings, much more accepting of all other kinds of people who are different from them, then we can expect from the readers, from the world's readers, that they're going to reject that kind of writing. If it's put out, it won't be accepted. It won't be read. If it's not read, then that writer will have no motivation to write anymore. I mean, that's how it works, right? Your books don't sell. You don't have any motivation to continue on that journey. So I think it's a reader's kind of prerogative to say that we didn't like this book, that this offends us. And if they say that, then it's not like we are stopping them. We're not censoring them per se. If that's what they don't want to hear, we're not saying don't say what you have to say. Say whatever you want, but I don't want to hear it,
Well, and I think that gets back to the true definition of censorship typically is the suppression of freedom of speech by a government figure, by somebody who can actually sanction you, jail you, fine you, whatever it is, for saying something that goes against the government or a governing body or perhaps a corporation in some capacity. But no, I would tend to agree, and I think it's not censorship if you get backlash from a certain segment of the population. In fact, if you want your writing to be accepted, you have to consider, if you want that mass audience, you have to consider what the things you put in your book are saying to everyone, and you have to sometimes make some choices. You have to somewhat self-censor, if you want to call it that. It's really just making story choices to appeal to the audience that you're targeting. And in fact, the things you were talking about earlier, saying that certain people are scum, saying that women are, have to be saved and things like that, that might actually appeal to a certain audience, whereas you'll get backlash from others. And I think, that's where nobody's stopping you. Nobody's saying you can't do it, but you don't get to benefit from your writing and be shielded from criticism at the same time. You can't have it both ways, in my opinion.
Right, I agree. And it's very funny because it's not just white people having a conditioned opinion or a one-sided colored opinion about minorities. It's also the other way around. I mean, which I've seen, and that's something I'm trying to blend into my writing as well. There's a lot of misconception about white culture among Indians as well. Very, very skewed conception, especially about relationships in Western countries. There's a long-standing kind of underlying misconception in Indian societies that North Americans and the Europeans, they don't value long-term relationships. They cannot fall in love in the way that we do in the East. They don't have family values. They don't care for their children. I mean, I don't want to generalize. Not all people think that, but a lot of people do tend to think that. And because when I talk to my friends and relatives here, they tell me, oh, I wrote in my first book about liking, falling for a coworker who was not Indian, and they're like, wait, do those people, do they understand love? Yes, of course.
Right.
To love is human. Everybody
Exactly.
understands love, right? So it's because, and now the world is becoming a smaller place. Cultures are mixing. People are going everywhere. So now people are becoming more familiar. But in the past, especially India you have to understand the perspective. India was colonized for 300 years by the British, and they were completely segregated. There was no intermixing of cultures. The Indians were treated like scum in their own countries. Obviously, you cannot really blame them for having this underlying, misconception of their cultural values. But it's changing, and I want it to change. I want people to be enlightened, if possible, by my writing to about other cultures. This is an area that really fascinates me. The similarities between us as humans, from culture to culture, how fundamentally we're all the same, and how fundamentally we all feel and react the same way. We're all human, and it's genetically true too. Like, humans vary very little from one another genetically. Like, we're 99.9% the same, and how we shouldn't hate, but we should be unified. And that's kind of the underlying message of my series as well. So yeah, that's definitely there. And if some people can create fiction that bridges that gap and shows colored people in the correct context and white people in the correct context, then readers all over the world would realize there isn't really that much difference. People are people.
So, I just wanted to add something from my perspective, which was our main character, the character's dad is Canadian, the mom is her family, sorry, is from Jamaica originally. So it's our main character is two different cultures, and it was funny because we made he has this relationship with this other character, and a friendship is being built, and the other character said this one line and he's kind of a wise ass, and he was doing it because he likes to get a rise out of people, to Tony, our main character, and it actually got called out by a bunch of our readers, but they were all white readers. They were like, yeah, no, that's racist. But then my writing partner is a teacher, and she took it to all her students, and she was asking people from that kind of perspective, and they were like, yeah, no, we say much worse to each other. But we ended up cutting that line in the end. That's crazy. Because of that weird response to it. So.
Right. No, that's really funny, because it brings me back to my previous point where I mentioned people reading my characters with whitewash on them from the white perspective, and saying, well, this is not believable, but it was my own experience, right? And it's true. This is so because of all this fiction that has existed before us, before our times, where because the world was not such a small place then, and societies were much more isolated, and there was not that much, there wasn't TV, there wasn't so much, and people read those books, and they have stereotyped characters based on that, and you do something drastic now, and you're saying, oh, well, you're showing these people in a bad light because they're cussing, but that's what they do. Like, for example, in my latest book, I write about a professor who has a servant at home who brings them tea and does the housework. Well, a lot of people might think, well, that's not a good whatever way of showing a certain type of people, but that's the reality. Here in India, people have domestic help. They have domestic helpers. They pay them, and sometimes they stay full time. It's a reality. A lot of people in the West may not be aware of it, but it's not putting down any character. It's just the way that the system exists, good or bad or ugly. But that's how it is. And the writer doesn't necessarily have to pass any judgment on that social structure. They can just portray it, right? Because that's not our job as writers to pass judgment on how the society is structured. We can just show it like a, as to bring it into everybody's awareness that this is a social picture kind of thing. And then you interpret it however you want. I think that's pretty much what it should be.
And I think I think we could talk about this for a long time. I think if we did a part 2, I don't think we would even be done yet. But I think now is a good time to shift gears to shout outs. And I'll just start. I'll just kick it off because it's easier. Shameless self-promotion on this shout out of my first book in the Between Two Minds series. I actually almost fell into the trap of doing the damsel in distress character in that book, and I had to flip it to where she helped herself escape. Spoiler alert. But I just wanted to put that out there because I felt myself going into that, oh, let me use this mechanic, and then I tried to write myself out of it, and it seems to have worked. So I wanted to mention that, even if you're aware of these things, you could still fall. You can still maybe just kind of knee-jerk go into that mindset. But if you're conscious about it, and if you have sensitivity readers or other beta readers who can help you catch some of that, you can actually build a more compelling story that has a twist to it. David, did you have a shout-out for this episode?
I've got my Kunos and Gane, Shepherd and Wolf t-shirt on. So I'm going to say, since I've been talking about my writing partner through this one, we've got merch on our website, including this one. So, and you can get our books there too, and DC's book as well.
Right, Canada. If you want to get, the easiest way to get my paperback is there, and then Wright-Hammer.com if you're in the States, and international. I can send international too. It's just expensive. So.
Yeah.
Poulomi, do you have a shout out?
Yeah. I have my mug. I have my mug, guys.
You have your mug.
And your first book, DC and I both read your first book as well.
Have you?
Yeah, Color Me Confounded, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes. That's the first one. The second one, I'm particularly excited about this.
It's the blur.
It's the blur. It happens on you. Sorry.
It's the blur.
We'll put the link down below to what's the title again?
The title is Thought Warriors: The Coming of Kalki.
Yep.
Kalki. Yeah, Kalki. You want me to give you the link?
No. I'll steal it. I'll get it off of Amazon.
Okay.
I put all the links in there. Go on.
Yeah. Kirkus Reviews recently gave me a review, and they said that it is a cinematic book that won't wouldn't look out of place in a movie, which was very exciting because when I wrote it, I envisioned a movie. It has a lot of messages. I'm doing the Indian launch here on June 23rd at a bookstore in Calcutta, Kolkata. It's probably going to air on TV as well, on local TV. And there I do plan to, if I can, I might even live tweet at least my speech portion of it where I explain what the book is about, and I'm excited about it because it the bottom line for the series is trying to bring the whole world together in a fight against modern day problems like hatred, like terrorism, like megalomania of people trying to grab power in every aspect, corporations, governments. It's kind of allegorical, metaphorical, drawing from myth, drawing from science. But that's the theme where, it's like the power is within us for all of humanity to kind of unite and use the powers that are within us to fight this, to resist. So, yeah.
Very good. Really appreciate you coming onto the show, Poulomi.
Thank you for having me, guys. I really appreciate it, too. The time difference and everything, but you made it work. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate you.
All right. Thanks so much. Thanks, David. And thanks, everyone who stayed this long.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.